Yes, we're very pleased that we've finally got our full university designation. It's great. The name has caught up with the graduate school and the research profile and all the change and great stuff that's happening here. But that's not the topic today. We're just so thrilled. I'm really thrilled to be able to, again, welcome Canadian art and this panel, which has now become an annual event. And just huge kudos to the organizers of the entire experience of this week, and really looking forward to the panel. And just to say that, you know, OCAD University has a really strong commitment to visual art and to criticism and curatorial practice, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, and we're just so thrilled to have this dialogue within our walls. Over to you.
Thank you, Sara. We're delighted to be here once again. I'm Webb, the Executive Director of the Canadian Art Foundation. So I just wanted to say, as Sara said, we had a big gala the other night, which was a great success. And today is our gallery hop day. I encourage you all to take a map on your way out. There's 8 talks and tours planned, and I invite you to come to our launch of our fall issue at Angel Gallery at 5:30 this afternoon. Before we get started, I just want to thank our sponsors, BMO Harris Private Banking, the Globe and Mail, and our official television sponsor, Bravo, for all they do for us. We're delighted to be part of Culture Days today, which is happening across the country. And I'd just like to share with you, we have been working over the past 10 months on a new look for the Canadian Art Foundation, and working to look at how we can better communicate all of the things we do. In addition to the publication of the award-winning Canadian Art magazine, we also have a family of programs that we present in Toronto and around the country. And we're very excited to present that family of programs to you in our new look. And we have buttons for everybody today. And if you pick up a button, a gallery hop button, and you go to the Gladstone Hotel today, you'll get a discount on your purchases there. The Gladstone is our gallery hop stop today. So thank you for being with us, and have a great day.
So good morning and welcome to Canadian Art Gallery Hop Day. As Anne said, there's some great tours this afternoon. They start at 1 p.m. and then the official launch of the magazine is at 5:30. And by all means, you're invited. So it's at Angel Gallery, Ossington and Queens. So maybe we'll see you there. But first, of course, it's this morning's panel. Back in March, I sat down and tapped out some words to serve as a draft on a theme. It took only a couple of minutes, and they read, true north, true story, true aim. These are phrases that mean devoted, dependable, and accurate, something that is in its own way just convincingly right. It's a word key to the recognition of quality, to the idea of work that's true to itself and true to the viewer, a touchstone for art with an embrace wide enough to accommodate the real and the fanciful, the exact and the loose. True art sets its own context, and in contemporary art we've seen a return to themes and subjects that bear witness to our times. This new realism is framed by a wholly mediated cultural world set within an increasingly fragile natural one. Contradictions and complications abound, yet it's the trueness of art that offers a resolving anchor that seems ever more relevant. True story. It's a statement that I now think should have been written on maybe blush paper, since it's more than a little rhetorical and most definitely an early morning kind of prose. But it's our theme, and if it needs a little fixing, I want to suggest that for today, we use a phrase that Donald Webber came up with over lunch this week, when, after he took a look at the statement, he looked up, and after a polite pause, he said, "True enough." So, true enough is perfect, and it should be the operative theme for the day. True enough is a true that's loose at the edges, but it's also a true that's solid enough to set a direction and start a conversation. That conversation with me began with the last Venice Biennial, or Biennale. Daniel Birnbaum's Making Worlds exhibition, which was a tasteful and careful celebration of poetics and subjectivity in contemporary art. At the time, however, last June, I felt a little bit less generous and could only thank God for Elm Green and Dragset at the Nordic Pavilions in their mischievous installation that tempered the air of piety that hovered over Birnbaum's show. Usually I would happily put myself in the camp of poetics and subjectivity, but it's been my opinion for a while that the art world has some making up to do for its market-happy quietude during the Bush years. One wondered at the time, where was an art of relevance and engagement in the midst of world-changing events, culture classes, and transgressions against every social good gifted to the modern world from the Enlightenment? Birnbaum's show suggested some kind of permissible creative artist retreat. 2 years before, in the previous biennial, Robert Storr had transported the look of MoMA to Venice and assembled a muffled collection of art under the mantle of museological authority. In the biennial before that, closer to the TV images of bombs exploding in Baghdad and photos from Abu Ghraib, Rosa Martinez and Maria de Corral brought a political spirit to the biennial in a biennial that was a biennial of noisy and disheveled engagement. But it was a biennial where the touchstone of old radicalisms rooted in 1968 and the histories of the 19th and 20th centuries. Where was the 21st century? Where was an art that could connect beyond the art world and the art world's favored avant-garde history? An art that addressed a wider world in need of acute observation and imaginations of remedy. Where was an art about true? Well, it was under St. Catherine Street in Montreal. Last fall, the Montreal Museum of Fine Art moved its collection of historical art of the Americas out from an underground corridor to make room for contemporary art. The inaugural show for this underground space was called Global Warning, and it featured works from the museum's collection that ranged back through the decade and beyond into the 90s. Collection shows are not a particularly exciting formula for exhibition making, except when budgets are tight, of course. Within a year of the financial world teetering and waiting on government bailouts, Montreal and Stéphane Aquin, the curator, offered up Nancy Sparrow, BGL, Marc Séguin, Leon Golub, Roy Arden, and others to remind us how topical, incisive, and wise art can be when it carries an ambitious intent to speak about the world at large. That spur led to today's theme. To open it up, we brought together 3 panelists who cover most of the bases in contemporary art, from sculpture to painting to photography and more. From Vancouver, we're joined by Myfanwy MacLeod, who recently showed at the National Gallery of Canada in Nomads and at the Vancouver Art Gallery in an exhibition called Q, Artist Videos. She's represented Canada at international biennials, and in 2013 has a solo exhibition at Museum London. This past year, she also created a remarkable public sculpture for the City of Vancouver's Olympic and Paralympic Public Art Program, a project that she's going to tell us about in a minute. She's represented by the Catriona Jeffries Gallery in Vancouver. From Montreal, Pierre Dorion brings his expertise as one of the country's leading painters. His work was featured this year in a solo exhibition at the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal, and he is shown nationally and internationally and has received the Prix Louis Comtois from the City of Montreal and the Contemporary Art Galleries Association. Earlier, a survey of his work organized by the Galerie de l'Art de Université de Sherbrooke toured multiple Canadian venues. He's represented by Gallery René Blouin, Montreal, and Jack Shainman Gallery in New York. From Toronto, Ukraine, and as of last Sunday, Brasilia, as well as many other points elsewhere, Donald Webber takes a seat as a prize-winning photographer whose work has appeared in publications and institutions worldwide, including the United Nations in New York, the Musée de l'Armée in Paris, and the Portland Museum of Art. He's won a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Duke and Duchess of York Photography Prize, a World Press Photo Award, and also been named an emerging photo pioneer by American Photo magazine. His first book, Bastard Eden, or Chernobyl, was published in 2008. He's represented by the distinguished, Donald, is it 7 or VII? 7. It's by the distinguished 7 Network Photo Agency, written VII. These are the facts about our panelists. But to honor our theme today, let's also mention some of the things that are true about them. For Myfanwy, it's her amazing ability to make drawings and sculptures and other artworks that declaim a certain simplicity while quietly pulling on the complexities of enormous outside energies. And by this I mean that the edges of everything Myfanwy makes are porous to external references that imaginatively expand the literal dimensions of her work. She's an aphorist. She makes an art that says a lot with a little, trusting in a planned resonance to fill out the picture. The world starts in microcosm, then looms large. For Pierre, it's the insistent pairing and overlapping of abstraction and representation in his work. To look at a Dorion painting is to be caught up in the experience of a simultaneous doubleness or ambiguity in which appearances shift and seeing takes a long route to knowing. He makes an art about suspended certainties and drifting perceptions, yet he does it with an exquisite precision so that these liquid instabilities become our anchors for a world that we struggle to resolve. And for Donald, it's the dissolving of mediation in his photos. In his images, the mechanics of pointing a lens and capturing a light trace disappear, along with any other formalist considerations that might highlight a critical self-consciousness about the act of picture making. He is a post-Sontag photographer. His photos offer an arresting directness. They travel right from one seeing set of eyes to another. This lets him aim his camera at a landscape or a room or a person and come away with something that feels intimate, part of a realm of shared human experience, part of an act of communication. All of today's panelists are artists who bring us a little closer to being alert and alive in the world. We thank you for coming to hear them. We'll go from Myfanwy to Donald to Pierre, and then take some questions at the end. We need to wrap by 12:30. Thank you.
Thank you for getting up so early on your Saturday to join us. And thank you, Rick, for your amazing comments. Don't even know how to respond to them. So I'm going to begin my talk, speak mostly about a piece that I just completed for the Olympic Village in Vancouver. And the title of the talk is The Artifice of the Natural. This is the logo for Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. So, sorry, I'd like to speak about two early influences in my conception of reality, so to speak. On the left, Marlon Perkins, and on the right, Walt Disney. These two men, these two figures, loomed large in my life from an early age. So anyways, part of the sort of influence in sort of conceiving this piece, The Birds, was my understanding of nature, but as seen through sort of Marlon Perkins' eyes in a way. Their concept, I guess, of reality was very much informed by a kind of alien landscape that they would go into in order to sort of have these encounters with nature. And this idea of the alien is very much a part of The Birds. Walt Disney, on the other hand, sort of overlap because there was often sort of nature aspects to that as well. Let me show you. This is Country Bear Jamboree from Walt Disney World. Another sort of informative influence on the sort of work of the birds. This is actually an animatronic version of Marlin Perkins from CHOW in Boulder, Colorado. Another sort of influence for this work was Alfred Hitchcock's film The Birds, a film that I watched during a film studies course at Concordia when I was an undergrad, starring Tippi Hedren. Oh, this is not Tippi. This is Alfred Hitchcock, whose luminous technicolor and sort of dark, perverse sense of humor has also influenced my work in general, and specifically The Birds. Tippi Hedren, who later became an activist for animals, opened up her own lion sanctuary called Shambhala. She was also pivotal in opening up nail salons for the Vietnamese in California after the Vietnam War. Just an interesting tidbit I'd like to share with you. She's a multifaceted woman. This is me, actually, with my bird. This is Smudge. This was taken in Scotland in 2005 during part of my Glenfiddich residency. I've always had a sort of an interest in nature and also our relationship to it, how we romanticize it, how we anthropomorphize it. This is a still from Hitchcock's The Birds. One of the things that was kind of interesting to me in this film specifically is the sort of moral argument that they are having at the diner during the sort of siege of birds. And this is the esteemed ornithologist, Mrs. Bundy, saying, "I've never known birds of different species to flock together. The very concept is unimaginable. Why, if it happened, we couldn't stand a chance. How could we possibly hope to fight them?" Hitchcock chose several different kinds of birds in the film: the seagulls, the crows, and there was also a small scene that's set inside the sort of the house where the sparrows fly up through the chimney. So when you combine Marlin Perkins and Tippi Hedren, what you get is this. There's a sort of mannered quality to Hitchcock's films that kind of interests me, this artifice that is sort of sort of not the opposite of what we consider natural, but which I think is a kind of more like of a supernatural, which is really how I'm kind of interested in thinking about this work. This is the original concept proposed for the birds at the Southeast False Creek Olympic Plaza. Actually, technically, it's not the first proposal that I did, but this is the one that was chosen. I sort of saw the birds here as a male and a female, sort of like the lions that sort of, act as a sort of like entrance, a grand entrance. But I chose the sparrow for very specific reasons. I have 10 reasons. I'm going to read to you. The first is that they are frequently used to represent the common or vulgar or lewd because they are so familiar to us. It's also a very social bird. In fact, Mrs. Bundy was incorrect. Sparrows will flock with other birds. It is also a chunky bird. I like this a lot. It's not the sort of grace of the swan or the sort of heron, but the sort of squat little sort of fat bird that kind of interests me. It's very sedentary. It rarely moves more than a few kilometers, which probably explains its chunkiness. It is also an opportunist. It performs a lot of unusual tasks to obtain food, including opening automatic doors to enter supermarkets. It has spread throughout much of the world, and this is due to deliberate introduction and also the natural dispersal through shipborne travel. The original, this is a European bird. It's the house sparrow, and it was actually introduced into Central Park in 1852, 50 pairs. And then those birds spread throughout North America. and have often displaced native or natural birds to this or indigenous birds. However, I think people, because they're so much a part of our urban landscape, think of them as a sort of naturally occurring bird. I think this is kind of interesting. Part of this sort of, this site, the Southeast False Creek, is a former shipbuilding yard where ships were built for, immigration and emigration. It's also interesting because sailors traditionally would actually tattoo sparrows on their bodies after they'd made a sort of a long journey, a 5,000-mile journey. I'm going to talk about the actual reality, so to speak, of making this project, to interject a sort of more down-to-earth kind of way of looking at them. First came the concept drawings. This is the male bird, and this is the sparrow, the male model that was modeled after the drawing. And then the female bird, and then the female model. We had to, because of the sort of parameters of public art, adjust some of the angle of the bird so that people wouldn't climb on it. This is a major concern in making public art. We don't want people climbing and hurting themselves. People will do it nonetheless, so I don't know why we bother. So, this is the process by which we actually made these birds is we take the model and it was actually scanned by a computer. Then the computer has these digital files, three-dimensional files, that then mock these pieces up in styrofoam. This is a dense kind of foam called EPS foam, and they kind of do it in pieces. This is the two heads of the birds, the male and the female. This is the leg. This is a sort of, once the bird has been put together, they kind of glue all of the sections together. There's an internal stainless steel armature that's sort of for structural strength. The foam is quite light. So you can see from here, they're about 15 feet high, and the sort of resting on an 18-inch base that was representing the sort of benches that they would be installed on later. Here it is again in close-up. This is the female. This is holding it up, so they sort of have to move them around with the legs attached. The legs were actually cast in bronze. After sort of doing this, they are smoothed down, sanded, so that, and then covered with a coating. It's a kind of a hard coat. It's stronger than resin. Apparently you can drive a truck over it. That hasn't stopped the skateboarders from skating off the tails of it, but needless to say, they created these cages. I'm always quite fascinated by the sort of like images of the process. This was made in Calgary by a company, and so I was flying to Calgary, every couple of months to check the progress. This is the female bird. These are the feet that were cast. They kind of slide in. This is before they had the patina put on them. So we can have some side. This is bronze. And so all those little cracks in there were eventually welded together. So once the hard coat is put on, then they put another coat of stuff on. I don't know what this is. Oh, this is just before they paint the birds, actually. So this is from behind. So they spent about 3 months sanding them down in order to get them very smooth. This is without the paint. And then they were painted. This is actually leaving Calgary for Vancouver. They were trucked from Calgary to Vancouver. And this is arriving in Vancouver. Now, it was funny because the contractors who were working on the plaza had to be there for the sort of like to dig out the concrete to install the birds, because they had these sort of posts that sort of the birds' feet slipped into. And the guy, what's his name, Jim, was driving in from the suburbs where he lives and passed these on the road in. on the way to work. Here we have, this is the tail end of the male bird, I believe, and you can see underneath there's like the little square where the posts fit in. This is, the Olympic Village was, this piece was supposed to be installed actually in September of 2010 for the Olympics, but there was some bureaucratic problem with that, and so they didn't get installed until April 2010 after the Olympics. And I had one of the construction workers come up to me and say, "This is very good, you should have put this in for the Olympics." Really? What a thought. So here it is, the male bird being craned in. You can see that his feet are off. And then this is the female bird as installed. This is a close-up of her head. And then we have the male bird. So you can see it's sort of like the attachment here, and then these are the feet as they're, after they've been patinaed, so they just sort of blend in more. This is them on the plaza together. I like this one because it reminded me of almost like Birds meets North by Northwest in a way. And then this is at night. I'm almost done. So I just want to sort of say, you know, in conclusion, I don't know if that was 20 minutes, probably not, but more time for questions than the other people. But part of the sort of interest in, Hitchcock's film is, and how it relates to my work is this, the open-ended sort of like how the film ends in The Birds. It's very open-ended, it's very ambiguous. They just drive off. We don't know what happens at the end. And I think reality really reflects this. You know, we don't know what happens after sometimes. It's sort of like, and I'm hoping that my work has that kind of ambiguity as well as open-endedness that allows people to kind of engage with it in whatever way they choose. So, thank you. I think I forgot 10 of my other ones. Oh yes, I forgot to say that the sparrow is also not protected by law, and bird watchers don't really like the sparrow.
Not on the cover of the new Jonathan Franzen novel.
No, I know, but you know.
I have a question for you about
Yes.
sort of environmental. Yeah, a question for you about sort of environmentalist
Yes.
meanings for the piece. You're getting so much mileage out of the scale of these things. I mean,
Yes.
lots of public art has to go big just so that you can see it outside. But with the naturalism of the birds and the scale, how tall are they?
They're like 16 feet in total.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've basically turned Vancouver into Lilliput. So
Yes.
that, you know, the birds are looming over, the birds connect with the landscape. It's almost a kind of reverse environmentalism where,
Yeah, but don't tell the city of Vancouver because, you know, part of my problem, this development was actually touted as a very ecologically friendly, sustainable. It was like part of the LEAD program. But I always am kind of, I find the sort of ecological sort of aspects problematic. Because I think there's a kind of hierarchy, like it's sort of like the fact that sparrows are not protected because they're not indigenous, they're also not, they invade other birds' nests. They don't get the sort of same sort of like, they don't have the same status as something else in a way and everything. And I wanted to kind of invert, you know, in the way that Hitchcock inverts, this sort of relationship between man and nature and the birds, to invert that by having this sort of like overscaled kind of thing that dwarfed humanity in a way. And it's sort of like, because I think we consider ourselves, you know, so central, and in fact, not at all. You know?
right, so you take us back to the Wild Kingdom. And you get,
A little bit, yeah. But the Wild Kingdom, it was all about them leaving the sort of ordered world of the sort of zoo in order to go out into the landscape and sort of like control or tame it. You know, I would have, but I don't trust these sort of like video links and everything like that. They had a great one of Jim Fowler and Marlon Perkins wrestling a snake and everything with this sort of voiceover narration about, you know, oh, this snake is going to get us and we can control it and everything. And I think it's sort of like as the sort of ecological movement has progressed, because I mean, that was, for that time, very, you know, about, you know, saving nature and giving people a greater understanding of nature. The sort of dialogue has shifted enormously. And during the sort of conception of this piece, there was also an article about alien invaders, talking about certain sort of like the sort of toads that have taken over, the giant hogweed. There's also a Scotch broom as well. There's this sort of invasive plants. But I find there's a kind of xenophobia sort of that accompanies that. It reminds me of blue dogs. You know, we're always talking about the immigrants, the aliens that are coming to take our jobs. And for me, this is a sort of like, there's a kind of problem there in how we kind of try to save one thing over something else and everything like that.
So it wasn't ever a question of coming up with kind of abstract forms or pop culture forms or anything like that. It was all to do with this kind of realistic interface between these big birds and suddenly...
Little people.
Yeah, little people.
Yeah. But you know, the birds were bigger inside than they were when they got outside, which was an interesting shift for me. Because it's like when I was, you know, visiting them in the studio being made, they were just huge. And then you get them outside, and then there's all these buildings, and then all of a sudden the scale shifts again, and thinking, oh, I should have made them bigger. And one of my original proposals was to have 5 sort of like giant old growth tree stumps in the plaza, 30 feet around and 18 feet high, or no, 30 feet high. But the problem was, it was like the space couldn't accommodate that, and so they asked me to sort of create a second proposal. The second proposal actually ended up being the one that I think worked better, just for the space itself. And that was kind of an interesting kind of negotiation for me too, trying to sort of figure out how, you know, to take some of the things that I was thinking about and translate them to a new piece.
What kind of reaction have you gotten to the piece?
Well, people really like it.
Yeah. Have people given them names yet?
Well, yeah. Well, actually, the PR person wanted to have a naming contest, and I said, you know, they're not pandas and they're not alive, so I don't think we're going to do that. But the guy who was working on them actually did name them. And he called them Sweet Pea and Baby Rosario, so I don't know.
Perfect.
So I think it was sort of like an interesting, you know, but you know, I've gotten emails from, you know, forwarded on to me about, you know, someone said, oh, I had a really bad day and I went and sat by the sparrows and they made me feel really good. But then I had other comments which, it's like they're kind of weird, you know, because there's a kind of disconcerting aspect to them because they're so big, and the sort of, the male bird in particular, he's got his head turned and it kind of feels like he's looking at you. I mean, I did want to have lasers coming out of the eyes at one point, but there's already some weird laser light show going on with the landscape architecture. I couldn't compete with that, so, yeah.
It's a great project. Thank you.
Thank you.
The work I'm going to show you is, it's not necessarily my greatest hits or anything like that, but you know, I've been thinking of this theme of true enough, and I decided to kind of show a bit of a progression, and not necessarily chronologically, but sort of how this idea of reality has sort of progressed within the last 5 years or so. Just to give a little bit of quick background so you kind of can understand where I'm coming from, I was an architect before, and I left that job quite quickly after graduating from here, actually, in 1996. And then after I quit architecture, I ended up working for the Globe and Mail for about 4 or 5 years. And it was, you know, very sort of daily, day-to-day stuff, you know, whatever happens during the day, I've got to go do it. So I was very much always sort of steeped in this idea that I just need to go get a picture of something that's happening right now. And for a while that was fine because the pay was good and I was happy, but after a while I started realizing that that's not quite what I wanted to do. So I ended up moving to Russia in about 2005, 2006. And this first picture here is from a protest in Moscow and for the opposition rallies against Putin. And I kind of want to leave with this photo because it's kind of the first picture that I took that was this idea of a transition between, you know, what is a photojournalist and what is a photographer. And I find that at first I was kind of opposed to this idea of labels on what it is that we do, but there is a reality, and you kind of have to approach your work in a certain way. You know, when I was working for clients, I was providing a service to them. But when I got to go on my own, I realized that I don't have to sort of predict or to say exactly what it is that's there. You know, this idea of objective reporting is never actually going to happen. And I think in a case like this is, you know, I'm not really sure if I like the picture or not, but what does sort of intrigue me about it is this kind of idea of a layering, that it allows you to sort of drift through the picture and kind of interpret your own reality within that. And you know, I'm essentially providing a framework and a structure for you, and now it's sort of up to you to take that and interpret it in your own way. So, as I started getting into my work in Russia and Ukraine, I guess like every good young photographer has to go through certain phases, and this is the phase that I went through, you know, is to kind of get down to the very basic core of reality of how other people live. And this is from about 2005. This is in Ukraine, and these are a bunch of former current cons mixing Russian-style crystal meth. And this project kind of began while I was crossing the street one day in Kiev across a zebra stripes. And when I was crossing, you know, I still had this sort of quaint idea that I was Canadian, that, you know, since I'm on foot, I sort of have, you know, the power over the rest of the population, you know, that there is a respect because of I'm not encased in metal. But that's not so. This was about 3 months into my first trip, and a giant black Mercedes was sort of barreling down the street, and we kind of started playing a game of chicken. And it took me quite a while to realize that I'm probably going to lose this game, so I need to sort of step off the street. And the Mercedes ended up stopping, and he was cursing at me, and I cursed back at him, and we had this little fight. And my friend said to me, he says, "Don, do you know who this is?" I said, "I really don't care who he is. You know, I'm a pedestrian. You should respect me." And my friend said, "You've got a lot to learn." And that was kind of the first idea where I had, you know, maybe I can take what I've learned as a news photographer, as a photojournalist, and start, you know, exploring ideas that go a little bit deeper. So that sort of incident all kind of triggered this idea, idea about power and the curse of power and the wounds it inflicts on those who don't have it. And I was interested in this idea of acquisition of currency. And it's not necessarily a currency, a monetary currency, but this currency of power. And in the East, that's really the way the system works. It's based on who has the power and who doesn't. So I started photographing. This project became, I called it The Underclass and Its Bosses, and I ended up photographing sort of the two sides. I wanted to photograph the police, who sort of inflict the power, and then those who the power is inflicted upon. But I felt the work kind of to be a little bit pedantic, I guess, and that I was kind of being too blatant. You know, here's a cop breaking somebody's leg is a very obvious picture. It's a very powerful picture. But I found that with photography, we're allowed to have subtleties, and I think that's the most important and powerful thing about photography, especially for me, is that, I said before, I can give you the framework and the structure, but what I like is sort of the ambiguities, that when a viewer is looking at my photography through a book or a magazine or on the wall or whatever it is that there's an interpretation that we're all sort of allowed to exist within. And then I was sort of more and more exploring this idea of power. I kind of wanted to go even a little bit further and you know, look at sort of symbols of power within Russia. And you know, when you're working on this, especially for me as a photographer, I need to find something that it is that I'm talking about. It's wonderful to have these ideas, but if I can't find something that addresses it, that illustrates it, then for me, I don't find it successful. So I like to find something that lives in the basis of reality. And the great thing that I personally love with photography is that it, again, allows you to be out there and you're in something, you're in people's worlds, you're in their milieu, and you're allowed to be there. And part of the project, for me, kind of became more successful when I started on this sort of mini-series or chapter within a book, which is coming out next fall, 2011, was I started photographing, well, I didn't, anyway, so again, a little bit of quick background, but I was walking down the street again with another a friend of mine, and I saw a guy with a tattoo on his ring finger, which was an Orthodox cross, and I thought, oh, he must be a religious fellow, but he doesn't look like one. And I asked my friend, and said, he doesn't look very religious, you know, shaved head and sort of baggy eyes, bloodshot, and skinny with the veins popping. And he said, well, again, same fellow who told me I have a lot to learn. He says, Don, you have a lot to learn again. And that's a thief, and the Orthodox cross is the sign of the thief. It's sort of it's a 150-year-old tradition that goes back, you know, to Russian Tsarist times. And I thought, well, that's very interesting because, you know, this idea of subversion of symbols and how they sort of use these symbols to create who they are, this personality. So I started kind of getting a little bit more involved into called Zeks and their lives and this idea of the tattoo and who you are on the bodies. And but what I kind of became quite fascinated by was this idea of toughness again, this idea of power, that they've got something that I don't or you don't. But there was this kind of, you know, machismo or macho-ness, very sort of manliness, but also a very sort of delicate existence that they have, you know, especially with, I like this photo with the cat, he's sort of very sort of paternal with his cat, yet his tattoos mean that he's a choker, and he had killed a couple of people using his hands. But then, you know, in discussing that with him, and I thought, well, okay, you choked somebody. It's, you know, I'm not a judge, and you know, you can associate with certain people, and you know, photography again, you're allowed to be into somebody's world, you're allowed to be into their realm, and I think if you start, you know, acting as a jury or a judge, then you're going to be unsuccessful. So, of course, you know, personally, morally, I was quite shocked, you know, when he told me that very matter-of-factly. And as we got talking, and he said, well, you know, the choking became because he felt that he had so much integrity that he was living a moral life, and that we were all essentially sinners, and that the only way to extinguish the people that weren't living sort of up to a moral code, as he was to choke them. So, you know, just a little bit of background, but you know, again, this kind of dichotomy between this brutal strength, yet and this sort of you know, maternal instinct to take over with the cat and such. And these are kind of the things that themes that I started exploring, and you know, going beyond from that very first photograph. You know, here's a protest, here's soldiers, and you know, something's not quite right. The idea. You know, again, I like this kind of instinctual path like this that you go down. And when I was talking to the Zeks, they were telling me this code that they live by. One of the codes was that a Zek can only marry or date a fellow female Zek or prostitute. Those are the only sort of women or men that they're allowed to be associated with. And again, you know, these were all something that if I had done research or if I'd read, I would never have figured this out unless sort of being on the ground, being within these worlds that people had allowed me to be within. So just a couple of photographs here I started to make a series of portraits, just sort of very simple head and shoulders portraits of these girls that they call Natashas. So I did a little series of Zek and Natasha, and I felt it was kind of like this sort of love affair of the heart, which I was in a way kind of intrigued by, but also sort of repulsed by.